and I can hear you just fine. And
That's
now it's all yours, Zishan. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Actually, your guess was very well.
Hi everyone, it's me Zishan. So today we are gonna talk about the containers. That is the most awaiting feature in the Canvas app because it's usually come into the public preview. It before it was in the public preview, but now in the 2021 around in July, maybe June, it got publicly available for all of them since then. So, in a series of our session where we have talked about the patch functions and we have gone through all the SharePoint list and how to patch each and every type of, the SharePoint list through the Canvas app. So in the community, we are going to talk about the container, and if it's visible, if we can, if I can give the session within the time span, then we can talk about the bulk operations, the gallery, and the multi-step forms. Okay, how to do this to standardize and normalize the business process in the whole organization. So let's start from the container. So it's a little bit, a short introduction. So I'm having a 5 year plus, or maybe the 5 year, as a techno functional. I just kick off my career through from the dynamic CRM itself. And then, at the time it was not being, it was not being called as the Power Platform, and then it started to take the hype with the passage of time. So you can find my LinkedIn, as well, the phone number and the email itself. So let's start from the what we are gonna talk about today is basically related to the containers and the multi forms and the screens, and we will do the bulk operations, and then we will do some sort of the implementation, how to do them in the practical way. So at the end of the session, we can ask you guys. I'm open. You can ask the questions. I will try to answer within the time span, and then you can find the recorded session at the end of this. So here what you will see through the implementation, okay, what I have done and as a practical end using our trial environment. So we will use the multi-screen and the the forms and the containers. So you can see how they are getting, it's basically the responsive one. So containers, everything, everything inside the container is is responsive. So let's talk about the container itself. When we are grouping something logically, because then it create a hierarchy. Okay, I will show you in attribute view, in attribute view in our Canvas app. So you can see how many the items are there, the control are there inside the container. So container is basically a boundary. Whatever it comes inside and fall under his supervision, or maybe then boundary, it will be responsive. So before the container, the developer were the app maker were trying hard for the layout, for the proper layout, because it works for some of the screens, for the tablets, but it doesn't work for the for the mobile. But because of the container, it had become the responsive, okay, and it works with each type of screen. So container is basically a useful way to create the layouts in the Power Apps. Basically, it holds a set of different controls, and it also has its own properties. You can, place anything inside the container, a label, a button, okay, and anything, maybe the icon. So it will become the responsive itself. So you can start, there are plenty of the control that you can, that you can add inside the container. Okay. So you don't need to change it, you don't need to customize it manually. For example, changing the horizontal, the vertical, and then adding the, defining the length and defining the width and height, manually. So everything is responsive. So whatever we will talk, in a sense of grid levels. There, just consider this whole screen. This whole screen is divided into 12, segments, as 12 units. So most of the control we can add inside the container, but there are some sort of limitation that we can't, we can't add, and we can't utilize the power of container itself. That is basically more probably is data table, the PDF viewer, and the web barcode scanner itself. So by the way, it usually people ask these questions. Then you have already told us, the container is something when you are gonna group, the controls, you are calling it as a container. Then what is the difference between the group itself? Okay, we can add the controls over the canvas app, okay, over the canvas app screen, and then we can press the control G, or we can add them inside, in a group. It will become the container. So what's the difference? It's not like that, because in the group you can add anything which doesn't make sense according to the logic. But the container, you should add, as the standard, you should only add those stuff related that are make sense, are related to the domain in a one container, and then you can create a multiple container to group them. Then it will become the responsive as per the screen's layout, the resolutions. So here it made the difference between the container and the group itself, that whatever you will insert inside the group, okay, it will be added as a part of that group. But remember, the group, whatever you will add the property on the group level, it won't inherit that property to its child controls or overall the screen. But this one is not true in a sense of container. In a container, I will show you the practically so you can get to know what does it mean by what is the main difference between the group and the container itself. For now, just consider the container has its own property, but the group doesn't. So whatever we apply the property on the container, it got reflected over its, the child itself. It replicates its effect to the child. So we can call this one is the logical grouping, while the other one is it can be mixed non-logical. It depends on the, you can add anything inside the group. So let's talk about, why we need to use the container. Of course, we want to save our plenty of the time. We want to show the proper layout to the user itself. Previously, the app maker was really trying too hard to place the items, and was, they were trying to put those controls in such a way so they can render over different type of screens as resolutions. But because of thanks to the containers, once they got publicly available, people started to use in the production environment itself, because then we do not, no one need to use the X and the Y positions of the individual control because of the container. Because previously what was happening, if app maker were not using the container, they were doing it manually, defining the size, the width and height, okay, in the screen. And let's say app maker created the app just for the laptop user, just for the tablet. So whenever a person trying to access that app over the mobile, it totally got, it usually got broken. So, and that throws the,
Sorry, Osama, just for reference. I am still seeing your first screen. Is it? Is there any network
are you
latency
sure?
at my side? Yes.
Can
Is
you see
anyone
the
other
screen?
have the same issue? Maybe not on.
Yeah, I'm also seeing the first screen.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That you guys should have
Really?
already. Uh, let me just share it, a whole screen. I was,
Yeah. No, it's.
Okay, now yeah, now I can see that.
let me just show the entire screen. I hope you can now. Okay. Is that visible? The sixth one?
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, it's good.
Yes, it's
Okay, okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry for
that's much
that,
better.
guys, what I've already discussed. But let me rewind it. We just talk about the containers and the limitations and the difference between the container and the group. For the container, I said, it's basically a logical grouping of the individual's controls. The control can be anything. It can be icon, it can be a text field, it can be the drop down, it can be a button, it can be a label, anything. But you know excluding these things because they are still container, not they do not support the container property itself. The difference between the group and the container, they both act like a boundary for the controls, but whatever you add inside the group doesn't make does not inherit, it doesn't affect the child controls. Let's say you defined 10 pixel height and 10 pixel width for the group. So the child between, the child inside the group won't get, reflected because it doesn't show, it do not support, and it doesn't have its own property, the group. But for the container, if you define this type of, the resolution for the width and height, it will be reflected over the child itself. And let's talk about the why use containers. The containers, we can basically, the containers makes the layout of our app maker, so he doesn't need to change the properties manually. You just need to define, and it will be it will be applicable for all type of screens. And there are not just one type of container, there are three type of container itself. The one is basically a vertical container. In our language, we usually call the from the bottom to the top, like this type of angle we call is vertical. But when you will look at the icon inside the canvas app, the screens will look like this to the horizontal. In the vertical container, it stacks everything from up and down. But for the horizontal container, as you can see here, this is the vertical container and this one is the horizontal container. And then there is another type, the container itself. If you want to stack anything over the other, control, then you need to use the container itself. As you can see here, this one has a bigger area, the yellow one, and then we can stack the second button over it. And then it's a third one over it. So this one is a property of container itself. So let's talk about the vertical container and the horizontal container. In the vertical container, as what is the difference between them? It's basically representing the direction. On the base of direction, we can segregate them. We can make a difference between these containers. For the direction for the, the direction itself shows a depicts a determines the orientation of item inside a container. A vertical container is basically if you are gonna show the stuff, in a manner, such a manner from top to bottom or bottom to top. So it will be stacked from top to bottom, but you can change, the type of container even after using it. Okay, and then even you can place this item at the bottom. It's doable. And let's say you are using this type of vertical container, then go to the properties of that container. You can change its type from vertical to the horizontal, and even you can change the the controls. You can you can change their position. The item one can be between and it can be at the end of this one. So let's talk about justify property. The justify property is basically it to position the control inside the container itself along the primary axis of control itself. We are gonna positions the control inside the container, but in such a way where we are moving its primary axis as well. I will show you the practically, it will become more easy for you to understand. So as you can see here, there are 4 type of properties just for the justify property. There are 4 levels. One is the left, the other one is the right, the third one is the center, and then it's a space between them. So as a practical manner, when we should use this one, we can use, you have even realized and you have created this such type of header where you are using the icon along its label and positioning them to the center, to the right, to the to the most left. So this is what makes easy if we use the container, the justify property. But previously, what we were doing, we were just simply dragging, dragging and dropping over the image. Because if you do not use the container, then you can simply drag and drop. But I know it's easy for the layman just to drag and drop. But remember, this stuff, this layout will not work for different type of screens because it's not responsive. So align property. In the align property, we use this to position the control inside the container, as per the previous one. But this time is the secondary axis. The primary axis that we are representing is basically x-axis. Okay, it's a general term. But in the secondary axis means the y-axis. For the horizontal container, of course, we can, we have already seen that, for the vertical container that we can place the primary axis to the from the left to the right and right to the left and side by side. But for the horizontal, container, we can place the control. Remember, this area is basically a container, and we have added these 3 things. It can be a button, it can be an icon, it can be a text, whatever it is. Okay, it's a control. You place them. And if you use the align property of horizontal container, then you can put them on the top. It's basically a top. And this one shows the bottom. And then there is another property like center. And then there is another property such as stretch. Previously, what we have seen is expand, to the side by side, like see here, a side by side. And where we can use this, of course, we can use this property in real, in real life is like this. You have already seen this type of where you are placing your, application, the Canvas app label in between of these icons. So you can use this type of, property. Here, I'm not talking about from left to the right. I'm talking about the middle one. Here, he used this center property, and this icon here, he is using this one between spaces. Okay, the gap property. Of course, you have used your, the align property and the justify property. Let's say if you want to add more spaces between them, okay, you want to specify how much spaces you want between them, then what you can do, you can simply use the gap property. The gap property, basically, if you want to define the distance between the control, this is one control, the second, the third. If you want to place some sort of space between these control, then you can use the gap property. Okay, you will see these type of stuff when I'm gonna do this implementation on the real time. So here you can see for the first control, it's basically a 0 gap. For the each one having a 50. Okay, we are not defining a 53 times. We are just defining the gap on the control level, on the container level, not on the each control level. So we will only define a 50 pixel, gap on the container level. So whatever will be inside that container, it will get distance. Okay, but this one is not true in a case of group. Of course, we have created this group and we have added this type of the 3 buttons, and there is no way to place the space between these control using the groups. But this one is, this one is possible in case of, the container. So where we can use this gap property, of course, we can use this gap property if we want to. For example, there is a form, okay, and there is a business process in your organization. They're asking you to perform this first step, then the second step, then the third step. You can call it as a first form, second form, and the third form. For example, whenever you go, are you going to, apply for the position? Are you going to form some sort of form? Of course, you have seen some sort of, on the header side and navigations. If you click here, it will navigate you to the second one. And even you can use the spaces between these, this one you can use as a business process. This one is the first step, the second, the third, and even you can use for the button itself. So let's talk about the overflow property. As you can see in the screen, for example, if you have just one screen, but your data, your columns are too many, okay? Of course, not all the columns we can't place them in one screen. So it means your controls started to get overflow. So then what type of property you need to use? You can use the overflow property. There are two types of overflow property. One is for the x-axis and one is for the y-axis, the horizontal and vertical. You can disable them, okay? For example, if you disable them, then you won't be able to see the rest of the controls. But if you enable it, for example, you can see this one is basically an horizontal, horizontal overflow property. Here he has enabled because, he was having 5 different buttons and we were not able to see them over this one screen. So of course he need to add some sort of, the scrolling. So you have seen this type of, the behavior whenever you scroll on the internet or any type of social media. So for example, here he has enabled the horizontal, overflow property as enabled. So then you can see all the control that is riding inside that container. And this is true in case of, in case of vertical itself. Let's talk about the next property, which is basically a wrap property. For example, for example, you have a 5 button. This, look at it at this screen. The same like if you have a more, controls over the one screen, and if someone is gonna use this, application, and he has some sort of a different screen resolution, and you want to show the user this type of behavior, means shrinking, so it can shrink itself, it can wrap itself in such a manner, so it doesn't break the functionality, even the view itself, the aesthetic layout. So see here, here we can see there are five buttons, but whenever we use this wrap property, and if we decrease the size, it started to position itself in such a manner, okay, and now it's using each cell of the grid. As we have already talked about, let's say if you are having 2 different, columns in a screen, and if the screen size gets shrinked or resized, then these 2 columns will become the one. And if you are having 3, it will become 2, and then it will transit, from higher to the lower. So now let's talk about the vertical and horizontal container child properties. Previously, what we have talked about is we have talked about the container property itself, this boundary, okay. We have talked about this boundary properties. Whatever we define at the higher top level, at the container level, it will be reflected over its child itself. But remember, For example, but here we can define the properties for individual, container, for the individual control itself, such as the child. So there are flexible width, flexible height property, and this will be only, enabled. This will get only enabled when you are using the container property and your control is inside the container. Otherwise, you won't be able to set this type of property, the flexible width and the flexible height. Remember, if you are using the vertical container, then the flexible width will be enabled. And if you are using the horizontal container and you are placing your control inside that, you know, horizontal container, then you will be able to see this flexible height property. So not both of them will be visible, enabled at the same time. So you can see here, this is a flexible width and the flexible height. How? For example, here we are, just consider this, you are having 12 units on a screen. Just divide the screen over the 12 units. And now you can see this one, for example, having one unit, and this one is having 11 unit. So whenever you shrink your screen, it divides its size. The first control will divide its size as per the second. For example, the first control was basically, you can say previously it was 2 pixels. Okay, it was over the 2 units, but this second control was at, it was covering the 10 units. If you decrease the size of this whole container, the screen, then if it started to shrink, and if it become the 5, then this screen will be converted into the 1, means the half of the second controls, whatever you have defined. Look at this, the third row, you can see here, it's becoming the smaller, but this will stay like, the bigger one. But even, look here, the middle one, you can define the minimum width of this one. Look here, this one, these two both remain same, but at the start of the, scrolling to the horizontal, wrapping it, it was bigger, but it started to shrink. It has become smaller than these two. How it's possible? It's possible if if you have defined the fixed width, the minimum width of these two control, the fixed one and the fixed one. As you can see here, the fixed and fixed through as the name depicts. But this one is flexible. So even for this one, for example, let's say in some of the websites, people usually use the header, the footer. They do not want to shrink the side level because they don't, they want to allow the user, okay, the user experience, like whatever the screen size it should, divide the contents over the scrolling, but the main navigation should stay same like this. See here, so the user can take an action. So this is where we need to use the flexible width and the flexible height property. Let's talk about the second, which is basically the minimum width and the minimum height property. For example, as I have already talked, we have talked about it. Look here at the start of this screen, these three levels were same, but for some of the control we have already defined, whatever the screen size it should stays the same, like this one. You can see here the 400, where we have defined the width of 400 for this control. See, as the screen increase, it also increases its width. But when the screen started to shrink, when we are wrapping it, it started, it stays the same, like the fixed, because we have defined the minimum width. And this is true in sense of minimum height as well. Okay. So let's talk about the fill portion property. Okay, this one is, Here we are going to define, as I have already told, as we have already talked about it, you can divide your whole screen over the one unit. Okay. So if you could just give me 1 minute, guys, I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry for that. So as
Okay, okay,
I'm
no
talking
problem.
about, as I'm talking about, we can divide this, whole screen over the 12 cells. And let's say, you can see here, this is first control and second control, and this one is it was, it's having the 4, and this one is, if we are dividing the screen, then it will cover the portion of rest of the other. It will adjust, the other control will adjust as per the screen size. So let's talk about this property. This one is irrelevant to the container itself. So if you use the container or not, if you do not use the property of container, then these properties will stays there. Okay, this one is a fixed one, and this applies to each of the controls. So the border color we have talked about. Okay, we can use this one just to give the color to the border of the control. The border style, okay, we can do this one, the solid dash, and the border thickness, okay, and the fill, we can also fill the whole control, okay, and then we can define the height, the width, and the visibility. These stuff will remain same, and this one is to position, to make the distance between the container, the screen, and the parent itself for the horizontal and for the vertical. Okay, let's talk about, the container, let's do some sort of the practical implementation. Guys, can you see my screen, the Canvas app?
Yes, I can see.
Okay. I have already, this one we have already created in our one of the first sessions, and this one I just created them today, okay, just for the sake of session. So let's create a blank one. For example, if you want, okay, if you want to enable the container property, if you are using, okay, if you click on the insert, you can use the the container properties like this one, horizontal. As we have already talked about, there are 3 types of container: horizontal, vertical, and the container itself. We will use this one if we want to position another control over the first one, and this one is place the item in on a x-axis level, and this one is to place the item over the y-axis level. Look here, what I have already told you, that this one is the vertical, but if you talk about the icon, it shows you like this, because it shows the first item, the second, from top to the bottom, and this one is from the left to the side, right, and left to the, and right to the left, and side by side. Okay, so how we can enable, do we think, the container property is enabled? No. If you want to use the container power, the power of container, if you want to make it responsive, then you have to disable this, the fit to the scale property. Go to the settings, and then go to the display, and then here the size, scale to the fit. Previously, we were using this one, scale to the fit. The item should be, the control should adjust itself as per the available space, so they can fill the space. But you need, since we are gonna, as we have already talked about, the responsive mean, it will adjust its size as per the screen. So we need to disable the fixed stuff, that is basically like fill the available space. So we need to disable this one if you want to use the container property. If you want to see, I'm going to show you. Okay, I'm going to create a blank screen. Okay, and even you can create a different type of screen, the half partition, with the header and the footer, and then you can use the sidebar itself. So let's talk about the blank screen itself. We have created this blank screen, and over the blank screen, I can show you, let's say right now there is no control. Okay, this one is just a screen. If you insert a button, it plays here. Because right now I'm not using the container, and this is the behavior that the app maker was facing before the containers. So they need to position each and everything, each controls, most of the controls, by the manually placing, using the position, the size, the padding, and all the stuff. But as you can see here, I'm not placing this control inside any of the containers. This one is just placing them inside the screen. So if I click on the button, you can see it started to place here. So there is no, a positioning. There is no grouping for these buttons. Okay, we have talked about the grouping. Okay, I can click, I can click over them, and then I can press the Control G. So yes, you have seen this. When I press the Control G, it plays both of them, the both control inside the group. But remember here, if I click on the group, there is no positioning for the group itself. Just this one, there is no positioning. Look here. Just a size, the padding, that's it. But if we talk about, let's create a container beside of this, group, so I can show you a difference between the container and the group itself. How I can do this one? Just select the screen, and then click over it, insert, and scroll down. You can find the layout, because the main purpose of the container, it falls under the layout, because it works for the layout, for the positioning. So let's start from the vertical container, or for the horizontal. I know that in the horizontal container, it will place from the left to the right, or right to the left. Okay, but the default behavior is from the left to the right. So it plays you can see here. Okay, this one I choose strictly the gallery. I need to choose the here horizontal container. Okay. Remember, if we place any of the control inside the container, then you won't be able to use the drag and drop property. It will be disabled. Look here. These two controls are outside of the container, and I can drag and drop them. Okay. I can position them. Look here. I can define their positioning, the size, and each and every stuff. But this one will remain the same throughout the whole session, as I've already talked about these properties. The border, color, style, the fill, you can see here, this type of stuff. It will remain the same. But for this type of visibility, this stuff, the layout properties will get changed as per the type that you are using, the feature that you are using. Now let's select the container and start to insert the button. Okay, let's see, man. We just inserted the button. We can see here, it plays the button here. Okay, it did the same stuff like the one that where we are not using the container. Let's see what's the difference now. Okay, when I clicked, when I click the container and I started to, place the button, look here, it plays the button right next to the first one. Because we are using the, horizontal container. Okay, we have talked about the horizontal container. Let's insert the vertical container itself. Okay, we have placed the vertical container. Okay, before moving forward to the vertical container, as I already told you, if we are not placing the control inside the container, then you can easily drag and drop. And I have already told you, if you are placing these control inside the container, then you won't be able to drag and drop. Look here, move this control using the tree view. Okay, look here. He's saying, man, it's disabled because you can't do this. And you have to change their positioning in such a manner so it can fulfill its property. What type of property? This property, the direction property. You can't just using the horizontal container and you can just drag this one from here to place here. No, you can just move this button from here to back and forth. Let's rename them so we get to know which one is getting changed. This is the second button and this one is the first button. So to change the positions of these control inside the container, this is a container boundary, and we just place these control inside it. If I want to change the position of the button 2, then I can reorder here. I can place to the start. Okay, if there are plenty of the controls, let's say there are 100 controls and this second button is at the 100th level. You want to place it at the first, then you can use this property. Otherwise, for this case, for this scenario, using the left or the move to the start, they will both do the same. Look here, it got changed. Now let's talk about the vertical container. As we have talked about, whatever we will insert inside, we will place the controls inside the vertical container. It will place them in a stack, like from the top to the bottom. Let's place the button. See here. Okay, this one is the first button. Let's rename it just for the safe sense. Okay, now select the container again and then click on the insert button. You will find it got placed beneath the first button. See here, it's changing its, it's changing its position as per the defined rule here over the container level itself, vertical. And the same way, we can't drag and drop from here, but we can do the changings from here. Okay, we have talked about what is the difference between the sample, the individual controls, and what about the, the grouping, and what about here? I can show you the more difference between the group and the container itself. In the group, you can see here, there is no positioning for these two items. You can't place them to any of the direction here. It's disabled. Nothing is here. Okay, we can do this one. Okay, but this one is the text. It's not about the controls. Now let's talk about this one, the container. I want to place them. Let's go one by one, what we have discussed. We have talked about the container, its limitation, the difference we have seen. Okay, I will show you the difference through these examples. Why we use and the types. We have seen the types as well, but we haven't discussed about the container types itself. Third type. Let's insert this one. Select the screen, click here, go to the layout. Under the layout, you can find the container. Now let's place the button here and then place another button and then place another button. As we have already talked about, this container place the, position the control on each other over its, look here. As I can see here, this second one is placed on the top on the first one, and this third is on the top of this one. Here we can drag and drop, because you can see here, if we choose this container, you can't find the same property. It's acting like the simple grouping one, but it's, you get my point? Like here. Now it's the same thing that we have already discussed in the presentation. Okay, you have seen the difference between all of these. Now let's talk about the direction. Okay, let's move them. We have seen for the individual one, we can place them anywhere. It will place by default over each other. If we talk about the simple container, it will place on over the each other. And if we talk about the vertical, it will place from top to the bottom. And for the horizontal, from the left to the right. Now let's talk about the justify property. Okay, we have seen this to position the control inside the container, okay, using its the primary axis itself. The primary axis is basically the x-axis of this one. For this one, you need to select on the container. Okay, you have selected the container. And this one is the, again, this one we have discussed about the direction. And I have already told you that even you have placed this control and you're using this one in the middle of that application, at the end of the application development, if you find, hey man, it should be vertical, then you can do this. And you can send it back. So now let's talk about the justification. We can place, see, look here, this one is to the most left side. We can place them to the most right side. And we can put them to the center of this one. And even we can set them side by side. One is to the north, the other one is to the south. Look here. And if we talk about the, for this one, of course, in case of vertical, you can find it's something different. You can place them, you know, in the middle, at the end, and then side by side. But this time, you know, there will be a space between them that we have talked about. Look here. This one was related to the horizontal, and this one we have already talked about the vertical, as I can show you. So now let's talk about the align property. And before talking about the align property, let's start from here. You can see here, if you want to align them from here to here, okay, and if you decrease the size of this browser, they will break. Let me run this application. Look here. I'm giving the name to the, and even you can change the size of them. This one stays like as it is. So now let's talk about, you know, the okay, let's talk about the align property. Okay, we can align them for the vertical. We have already talked about, we can align them in a different manner. We can align them in the middle, at the bottom, and, you know, the stretched one. But for the vertical, look here, we can place them in the middle, at this side, and we are stretching it in the manner of horizontal. Look here. So whenever you want to create the header and footer, you can use this property. Just place here the label. Otherwise, you don't need to customize this one. You can simply go to the insert, and then you can on the screen, and then you can use the header and footer screen. And if you want to still create the custom one, then you can do this. You can use this property. Let's talk about, you know, the gap property. This one is the important one. Let's put them all together again. We have already talked about them. Let's place them in the center. The gap property, remember this, we are defining this property at the container level, at the parent level. So it will be reflected. So it will, it will reflect its properties impact over the controls. But this one was not true in case of, group. In case of containers, container type itself. I'm not talking about the container. So let's give the space between them. You can see I'm gonna give the 20 space gap between these control. It's not just about these two control. If there are plenty of the control, all of them will have a gap between, among them as per the 20 pixels. So this is the same like for the horizontal, for the vertical, you can place them at the middle. And then you can add the space. Let's say this time I'm gonna add the 30. Now, let's talk about, guys, is that clear to you? Are you getting the point why we are using and how to use them?
Yeah, it's good. So yeah, it's wonderful. So any other
Yes, it
feedback?
makes
Anyone
sense.
else? It makes sense. Yeah.
Guys, if you have a question, you can ask. So let's talk about, the overflow property. As we have already talked about, if there are plenty of the controls, for example, this one is a container. Okay, yes, this is the container. Let's place a multiple, the text inputs inside this one. So you can see here, there were 4 different control inside this one, inside this container. But I can't see, if I run this one, I can't see it, where it is. It's gone as per the size. So I can find it. To enable the property so anyone can, scroll it, we can enable the property for it. You can see here. Of course, this one, the data is inside the under, so we need to use the vertical scrolls. You can see here now I can scroll it. And I can see the last input. Now let's talk about the horizontal overflow. For this one, we can enable it. And you can see the vertical. Let me enable it for it. Since, I have enabled it for this one, but there is no overflow, so it won't show. If we are going to see here, I have enabled this one for this container. And if I'm going to add the different type of buttons, now it started to show the, the horizontal scrolls. Now let's talk about the wrap property. Okay. The wrap property for this one, for example, we have already talked about this one, that if there are plenty of the buttons, so how to achieve this one, just click on the container. And for the wrap, just enable it. When you will enable the wrap, so it started to show the content within as per the respecting the boundary size of the container. You can see here started to show itself. Now let's talk about what till here we have. You can see here till now we have talked about all the properties that are related to the containers. After that, if you enable, see here, if I select this control, you will see here the other section that is just for the control which are residing inside the container. But this flexible width and the width is not visible in sense of individual control, even for just container. Look here, there is nothing. But it will be only enabled just for the vertical, for the horizontal, and for the vertical container. So for this one, we are gonna, if you enable, if you click on the control, till as I already told you, till now we have talked about the container properties. Now we are gonna talk about the the controls property itself. And will only work if you have already using, if you are placing your controls inside the container. So let's talk about this one, let's select this one, this control, which is residing inside the container, as you can see from the tree. And this option will be visible. You can define the width of this, a width of this item, which is basically a minimum width. If you enable here, it started to show itself. Fill position. And this one we have already talked about the minimum width and the minimum height. When to enable, when will be the for this horizontal container, you can see here there is a minimum width property. If you enable this one, otherwise it was being called as a width. But for the vertical container, if you click here and enable the flexible height, here we were enabling flexible width, and here we are enabling the flexible height. If you enable, it will give a different name, which is basically a minimum height. So now let's talk about this, the simple properties of this one, the individual container that are residing inside the container, individual control that are residing inside the container. So once I enable this one, it's saying it's showing the content over this whole 12 units, as per this one. I can increase. How to do this? I'm saying it's respecting, I can decrease the size of this one. For example, just divide this ratio. Look here, I started to show its property. To show it in a proper manner, I think let me put to the most left side, and then this one. So now you will be able to make the difference. Let's say I clicked over it and I started to respect the flexible width, and it's saying 1, and this one is 0.2. Collectively, it has become 1.2. So for this area, 0.2, it's covering for this one, and this one is covering for the 1. The rest of that is basically a gap. So how to remove the gap? Let's say I'm removing the gap. And once I do this, you can see the changes on the fly. So now it's saying if I click here, it's saying all of them is being placed here. Okay. Let's enable this one. So now it's gonna take the 2.2. This one is first, this one is first, and this one is 0.2. If I want this button to cover a whole place and make them, shrink, how I can shrink them? I can simply give the property like 2, and I will give them the property like 0.1. Okay. Since we are using the wrap functionality, you will find the difference when I will disable this one. So I hope now you can see, if I disable the scroll itself, you will see the changes. And even, you can define, for example, you are giving the width of this individual container inside this one, out of this one. And this one is basically a minimum width. For example, it's saying whatever the screen size is, it should keep like this one. For example, this one. I'm going to show you here. If I run this one, if we have defined the 400 here, the minimum, it will stay like this. Even the size is decreasing. All of them is flexible. So now let's talk about the fill portion property. Click here and you will see, as we have to talk about, we can fill the whole area as per the out of the grading system. I can give the maximum value, I can give the least value. Whatever I want, I can define is 0.1 and it will change its place according to this container. Since this one is having more of them, let me delete some of the control I can show you. Okay, let's say this one. It's saying 0. I'm gonna give it 1 and it would start to show it will look here, started to capture most of the area because we increased the fill portion out of 1 and this one having a more portion than this one. You can define on a fly its size 20 and it start to shrink. If I have already added the scroll, I will be able to see the other item as well. Since this one is not having the container all over the body, that's why it's behaving like this. Otherwise, I can show you in a real quick manner, like for example, I'm gonna create another screen. And this time I'm just gonna place and you can see here this area, this screen area is bigger. So let's resize this one. Click on the container and then choose width. Please give the size of the screen for screen for width. Resize it and we started to drag and drop here. Now let's give the height as per this screen, whole screen. I'm gonna change its height of container height. And this time I'm gonna say screen for dot height. You can see here now this whole area is totally a responsive one. Let's place the item that we were talking about. How it works. Click over it, place the item. Now let's run this one. And let's try to run and resize in this manner. So you can see here it started to increase the size. We are decreasing the size and it's changing its size as per the screen. But it's still, responsive. What if I enable the wrap property? Click on the container, click on the wrap. And this time, let's run this app and start to wrap it in a way. We have seen this, it's still working in a responsive manner. And we have already talked about all of the properties related to the container and its individual control. Now we are gonna just talk about this one. We all are using, this is the normal one, and this one is the fundamental settings. Whenever we want to change, this is the font of the, here you can see, and the size itself, and either to show it's bold, italic, underline, this and that, and the color of this button, the color of this text, the color of this button, the color of this, the whole body. So, and you can even place their index as well, and what to show inside as per the hover over as a tooltip. So that's the end of this session. Tomorrow we will talk about the multi-form, how to submit the multiple using the patch function, and how to do this for the business process. Okay, how to enforce your customers to follow the business process. And then we can talk about the gallery itself. So that's the end of this session. So see you in the next session, guys.
Okay, that's awesome. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Dishant. That was
Yes,
a
because
really very good session. So let me just stop the recording and